All right, I think we can get started. Again, my name is Ashish. I realize it's the afternoon time, so I'll try and keep this as short as possible. And I don't want to be between you guys and the reception. I'm not sure if you guys are going to stay for the reception. But yeah, so the session overview, we're going to have quick introduction. And then we're going to look into what threat hunting is, what it is, how to do. If you're not doing any level of threat hunting, then how do you get started with threat hunting, and why is it so important? We'll go over a couple of scenarios in terms of if there is a known vulnerability or known exploit, how do you use that, and where do you go from there? And then just some quick takeaway summary at the end, and we'll have question and answers session at the end. But if in the meanwhile, if there's any questions, if you need more clarification, feel free to interrupt. I want to keep this more interactive as possible. What this presentation is not is this is not a silver bullet. This is just what I think, and it's from my experience. This is not a sales pitch. I do not represent any of the vendors out there. I do work for I'll get to it later on. And I'm hoping this is not boring for you and this is good use of your time. A little bit about myself. I'm a senior solution architect working for Dasher Technologies. We are one of the VAR or value-added resources, or another value-added reseller, if you will. We're based out of Campbell in San Jose. My primary focus is networking, security, cloud security, and audit and assessments. And there's some of the vendors that I work with. When I'm not working with the technologies, I'm most likely taking a hike with my 2 husky dogs that I have. So that's a little bit about me. That's my email and my Twitter if you want to reach out to me for any questions or in any other direction. So with that, let's get started. So I want to talk about a couple of cybersecurity threat intel or the threat reports that came out from Verizon the Verizon DBIR or a couple of other vendors like AlertLogic, and I want to review that with you and some of the findings that I have discovered. Some of the security challenge, as it's noted here, is when some of the cybersecurity professionals were asked, which of the following do you really consider is your top challenge facing your SOC? There's no surprise there. At the top, most of them said, 55% of them said that detection of the advanced threat is something that it's high of their priority. By advanced threats, we are referring to something which is hidden, it's unknown, you don't really know, there's not much information available on the outside world. That's the advanced threat. The second of the list is 43% of them also said that there's a lack of expert or expertise, security expertise that is required to process some or identify some of this advanced threat and how to mitigate that. And when surveyed, the same cybersecurity professionals were surveyed, with regards to what's the single most barrier for threat hunting, and if you have to implement some level of threat hunting program at your in your company, 45% or almost half of them said it's usually lack of budget. It's hard enough to get funding from the CISOs or the C levels just for the security. This is going a little beyond the basic necessity of a security. Not the perimeter firewalls or the endpoint protection, or even just visibility with the threat detection. This is proactive threat hunting. So getting that, having the CISOs and the C levels convinced to spend some money, it's always a challenge. Having said that, I think 84% of the same professionals agreed that the threat hunting is still the top security priority, simply because if it all comes down to them in terms of how do I really secure my organization, or are we really protected or not? And then only about three out of four actually said that they're spending enough time just doing some level of threat hunting, if you will. So that's obviously a challenge, and I want to see what we can do in terms of kickstarts at the very basic level, your threat hunting program, if you will. But before we do that, let's just talk about what threat detection or threat hunting is. Now, I mean, most of you guys are already familiar of threat detection, which is another way of just saying there is already a known executable or there is a known exploit that's already available, and you're basically using the information that's available outside, creating some level of signature, if you will, or IDS around it, and using that to do some level of protection against the known threats. That's really what the threat detection is. Threat hunting is kind of similar to that. It kind of goes along with it, except that in this case, the threats are unknown. It's the zero-day malware or the zero-day exploits, which you have no idea, or you don't even know where to look for information or know where to target. Let's take an example. You guys familiar with the exploit database, which is freely available online? This is exploit database is basically just it's an online resource or a database for all the known exploits that's available. You would have all the exploits would have some level of codes behind it. Now, if you want to know more about it, you just go to the exploit database. There's also a Google hacking database right there. You could search for spreadsheets with known passwords and all the other possible exploits that you want to search for, and there's some kind of information already there. This is your if you're looking into threat detection, you're really looking at some of the CVEs that's already available at the exploit database. This particular one is an example of a vulnerability or an exploit that was available in 2015 called shoplift. There's a CVE 2015-1397. When you go to this website, look into some of the known threats, and when I say known threats, that's it's another way of just saying threat detection, because that's what you're doing. In threat detection, you already know a threat that you're working against. You go to the exploit database or some of the other available threat intel, whichever source that you may use, and use that, review the code, look at the some of the possible ways the code has been executed, some of the targets and stuff like that, and based on that you come up with your own signature, your own IDS that you would later on use for your own threat detection, and that's really what this is. The one highlighted in red is really your typical signature, if you will, for your IDS. The one on the top and the bottom are just a bullet point for me to just reference this, but the real content is in the one which is highlighted by red. It's the /admin html_. It's it's a kind of an URI that you would look for, or forward_code. That's another one, and you would typically use some kind of signature like this for your internal threat detection, and then run a query against your threat intel, your threat data, and see if you have any exposure to that kind of exploit or a code execution. So that's really what the threat detection is, threat hunting goes a step forward from there on. It's really finding the threats you didn't already know about, and there's no information available. Like there's no there you don't even know where to start. You don't even know what to look for, and if it's something that might happen in the future, it might still be some variant or mutation of an existing malware or an exploit, but it's unknown at this point. I kind of have this slide just to show how similar both threat detection versus threat hunting is. Again, the threat detection, in both cases, you require some level of expertise. Now you're looking at the code, you're looking at the URI, at the payload data, the HTTP headers, and trying to make some sense out of what's really going on your network traffic, right? You require manual expert interventions. You have to you need an expert to look at it and see, is it really false positive? Is it really benign? Is it doing something that I should be worried about? And that's true for both threat detection as well as threat hunting. The sheer amount of data that you're going to gather from your network your network devices, your endpoints, your SIM, your log services. You most likely going to need some level of automation that's going to help you drive your IDS signatures that that you're going to build, and help you search through your threat data. You would also need the same experts to actually guide that automation. So that's true for both threat detection as well as threat hunting. The real difference, again, as we just saw, was the threat detection is really, you're focusing on the known threats. This must have happened to you sometimes. Your CISOs, your CSOs would come to you and say, "Are we exposed to certain exploits? Are we exposed to certain malwares?" And then so that's the known part of it, and then you use that data and do some research and get your signatures and do some threat detection out of it. Threat hunting on the other side is completely unknown. You just have no knowledge of what to look for. So yeah, through this presentation we'll see how we could actually leverage threat detection and see how do you actually use that to at a very basic level start your own threat hunting program, if you will. With any exercise, you really have to prepare yourself for before you start any exercise. You need to know what you need to gather, stuff like that, to be very successful. Same thing with threat hunting. Now you need to gather some amount of data that you would need, and you would that you can actually leverage or pivot against in your IDS, your signatures, your threat detection. So let's look at them. So on the left hand side, I have some, and again, these are just the examples. These are some of the examples of the data that you would be gathering through your network traffic, through your logs and stuff, and how you could use that to run a meaningful query through your threat data that you have gathered. On the right is another example of a typical payload data or a URI. Again, that's something that you could use to pivot your threat hunting or your threat detection program and see what you could leverage in terms of detection and IDS signatures. Source IP, destination IP, headers, user agent, your host being targeted, any and all the information you could gather from a URI. URI is basically what you see on the top, post / unknown vulnerability, stuff like that. Any and all the information you can gather from your payload body, stuff like that. Taking the example of what we saw here for the Magento example, we had this we use this content underscore admin HTML underscore as the URI as one of the thread point. Going back here, that would kind of correlate with the URI data that the kind of URI data that you would gather or might interest you in terms of your thread hunting or your thread detection. Again, the content underscore admin HTML underscore, that's just one of the sample that I happen to choose. All right, so while at the topic of we identified what kind of information or what kind of data that we could use to do our thread hunting or thread detection, whichever may be the case. It all again comes down to the amount of data that you're really storing or the amount of data you're collecting. And you have to be really careful. Do you want to collect all the data? Maybe, maybe not. The more data you have, the more visibility you get. But there is also, to really get a meaningful data, you got to be careful and plan ahead. And the three reasons why you would want to do that is cost, normalization, and categorization. Cost, it's simple. The more amount of data you have, the amount of data you're storing, it's going to drive your cost. You don't want to get into circumstances where the amount of data is so large, you're replacing your hard drives from now on because the amount of data is large. You could possibly look into leveraging cloud for storage, AWS, Azure, whichever that might be, and you could have a reliable elastic story to the storage for your thread data. But again, it all comes down to cost. Everything that you would start capturing, there's going to be a cost, and you want to make a informed decision of what information you're really capturing that's going to give you a meaningful intel on your thread data. Normalization, that's kind of like if I have to give you an example, let's for the sake of taking an example, if you have a network data or a network traffic, you have you're getting a couple of events or incidents that's happening from a couple of locations, one event happening right after another one. If you really have to get some consistency out of it and make sure that it's meaningful for you, you want to be certain that you could trust the location. You want to be certain that you could trust the time. As one example, so if you're getting an incident that happened before the second incident, the first incident happened in one of the location at say 1 plus midnight, and the second incident happened at 2 plus midnight. You just have to make sure 1 plus midnight is really what it is. The devices have to be time synchronized and stuff like that. So that's kind of where the normalization of the data comes in. You want to spend time more in terms of running your query against your data so that you can meaningful threat intel, and you could really focus on targeting your search for vulnerabilities rather than spending time just trying to figure out the correlation between the data you're gathering from different location. Categorization is going back to that slide where we had there are so many meaningful data points that you get from your network traffic or your logs. The amount of data you're capturing is also going to be high, and when the time really comes for threat hunting or threat detection, if you will, you want to make sure that when you're running your IDA signature, your customized query, that you're running it against a simple category rather than just running it against the whole database. A simple example might be what we just saw for the URI data. You want to categorize it in as a source IP, URI, destination IP. So you want to run the query against certain category of data rather than running it against the whole raw data, which is going to take that much more time. And in this case, time is really essence. So just summarizing this, while it makes sense to have a large data set, you really want to focus on the meaningful data that you're going to gather out of your network traffic and the network logs. I want to take we looked at a couple of examples for the kind of data that you can gather or you could pivot against and run your IDS signatures against. Let's take a little deep dive into, say, what a payload body execution may look like. And this, in most cases, this will require some level of security expertise, because now you're actually looking at the payload data, trying to figure out what really is going on. I'm going to take an example of two vulnerabilities here, or the two exploits. Apache Struts as one of the exploit that was released back in 2017, was very prevalent around 2017, at the start of 2017. Oracle WebLogic is another one, which is CV 2017-3506, CV 2017-1027. They're really they're identical exploits in terms of, if you look at their codes and stuff, you would see that they're kind of calling the same kind of execution, command execution, and this was, again, the Oracle WebLogic started towards the end of 2017, towards the tail end of 2017, and was more prevalent in 2018 and even beyond. I'm going to use these two examples to drive the fact that we could use the known exploits for your threat detection, and then you could pivot against that and see how you could actually do some advanced level of threat hunting that might be useful in the future event. Both of them are related because they are all, at the end, it's all Java code execution that's going on behind the scene. Both of them were most widely exploited vulnerabilities in 2017. So I thought there's enough information available for this if you want to research yourself. Let's look at the first one, which is the Apache Struts execution or exploit. This was released back in 2017, the early part of 2017. You could gather some information on, for the purpose of this, I'm just using exploit database, but you could get, there are a bunch of other online sites that also gives you information on where the exploit codes could be stored, and what you're looking at in terms of exploit database. So Apache Struts again was released back in 2017. If you drill down and start looking into the actual code for the Apache Struts exploit, there are a bunch of payload data that's available for you. You could choose any of it. Really, at this point, it's more of a art and science that you would pick on one of the payload signature and or a string, and based your IDS signatures based on that. This really comes down to your skill levels and expertise, and sometimes even institutional knowledge of the place you're working on, because you need to understand, is this a real legitimate traffic between, say, two web server or an application server and a web server within an internal traffic, or is it really coming from outside? Not sure if you guys can see this. So I've highlighted a bunch of strings that that kind of look interesting, and then you could possibly pivot against those string and see if you want to generate an IDS signature and run some level of threat detection on it. The one which is very interesting, and for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to focus on the one which is the bottom. It says Java Lang process builder, which is another just a Java string that's used. So that's how it would look in a payload, and you could again you could use this to run an IDE signature and run it against your data and see if you are seeing any kind of network traffic which has this kind of signature on your network. That might be interesting, that might be benign. That's something that you would have to review. Right. I want to talk about a couple of scenarios that might happen if you go if you go this path, and if you happen to select a string like a Java long process builder as an example. If you select that as a sin, you may run into a couple of scenarios. One of them is your IDE signature that you're using may fire very high amount of data, or it may fire very low amount of data. What that really means is if your signature was really meaningful, there is a possibility that the amount of data that you're gathering out of this is you're most likely going to fall into one of these three categories. The first one is the signature, the IDE signature that you used only fired for the known struts or the web logic attacks that were already available in the outside world, and that might be someone just trying to hack into your environment using the same exploit. That might be you may have some web traffic already that might be significant or relevant for you. You may not fire the IDE signature may not fire at all. That could be you maybe someone you don't have in most likely scenario you may have a web server which is already hardened, or it's or the web server is not even within the target of your investigation. So that's one possibility. Or you would it may fire and you would start looking into it, or as an expert you start looking into it and you realize that it's all really in internal traffic, which may or may not mean anything to you. If that's the case, there are if you're doing this manually, you're going to look into it for initially, and then you'd possibly think, well, this looks interesting, but it's not really giving me any value. Should I turn it off? Should I keep it? Most likely case, you're going to turn it off and go do something else. On the other end of the spectrum is you start getting a high data volume for the same IDE signature that you had. Now again, there's two possible outcomes to that. The first is it fired a huge amount of volume of data that it's too much for you to even sample or realize, or even inspect. What do you do with that? You may sample some of the data, maybe from today, maybe from tomorrow, and then skip a couple of days and then sample again some amount of data after a few weeks, just to see if this even makes sense for you. And then if you do that, and you may end up with the same result that you had with the low data volume. That this might be benign, this might be already a known attack, or this could just be a noise or your internal servers. You as a manual process, as an expert, if you're reviewing this, you would possibly come to the same conclusion again. Is this really of any value to me? Should I leave it on? Should I turn it off? Should I go do something else? The point of all this is it's one thing to have a great amount of data, that you could pivot against thread data. There's is second thing is preparing your data, but even beyond that, even if you have to do a manual inspection just to figure out if this is really making sense for you or not, that's probably not scalable. You'll probably not be able to work through it for a long period of time. It's not something you would sustain. That's probably why you want a dedicated resource, who's spending his time investigating this data. This is I think this is one of the biggest challenge of having a threat hunting program. You would also need you would need some level of automation to go along with it. That automation is going to help you run a query that you could use, and then use some level of machine learning or artificial intelligence to go along with it to help you provide the tooling. You would also require some level of high level of security expertise, because now you're looking at not just the common stuff like source IP, destination IP, but you're taking a deeper dive into the actual payload. In some circumstances, you may not even understand some of the stuff. But the point here is, if you have your tooling all figured out and in place, you have your dedicated resources. You sort of used the threat intel that you got from your known exploit, and you had some level of signature that you already had. If you have all this thing in place, you might be ready for the day when the actual exploit becomes might even hit you. So if that's the case, we took an example of the Apache Struts, and we saw this particular payload string that was prevalent in Apache Struts, and built a signature around it. The same exploit was actually used in WebLogic. If you remember, Apache Struts exploit was released way back in 2017, whereas the WebLogic was towards the tail end of 2017, almost towards the Christmas time. If you had your signature in place, if you had your dedicated resources and your tooling, your automation in place, you might be able to use that to do some level of threat hunting. And if you would have seen a network traffic with the same the WebLogic CVE with the same string, you might have had a chance to be alerted if that incident happened. That's exactly what happened. The WebLogic, the Oracle WebLogic incident was actually released back in 2017, this is the 2017, the 12, 23, 2017 happened to be a Saturday, by the way, and it's very unlikely that you would be looking at one of those threat intel or Chinese obscure Chinese website just looking at known exploits, even let alone any even the exploit database. But if you had already pivoted against the Java long string that we saw earlier, you might be able to use that for threat hunting. This was also announced on Twitter about the same time, around December 27. That's another threat intel that's available outside. And you look at it here also. The threat researchers, some of them were looking at it, and they also came out with the same string, which is I don't know if it's hard to see here, but it's the same Java long process builder, the string that was identified with Oracle WebLogic exploit. So if you had a signature-based IDS or already pre-built into your threat detection program, now you might have used that to do an advanced threat hunting in that case. And so this is what you would see. This is going back to the same Java long process builder payload data. Yep. Is this making sense? Do you guys have any question here? No? All right. So that was an example where we actually took a known exploit, which is basically your thread detection, your signatures, and then you use that to see if it can help you, kickstart your thread hunting program and see if you could actually use that thread intel to gather any information that may for any exploit that might be similar looking for the for future events. Let's look at the possibility where that might not be the case. No, you had no idea about Oracle WebLogic. You were not looking at Twitter feed or exploit database or one of those Chinese obscure site for validation of the new exploits that's available outside. I'm going to use the same example of Oracle WebLogic and let's do some analysis and see what we find. So in this case, going back to in this case you're hunting ahead of time. This is a unknown variant of threat. You didn't hear or know about the Oracle WebLogic release before this, and you were simply just collecting your data for your threat hunting process. You did your due diligence in terms of your normalization, your categorization, and you were sort of ready with the amount of data you have. You also had the needed automation and tooling in place for yourself to leverage when the time really comes. So this is just a sample, an example redacted payload data for WebLogic. Again, if you just look at it, you've never seen this before, you look at it and you were like, okay, I don't know what to make sense out of it. At the very top you have your post command. It says WLS-WSAT, which in a way translates for WebLogic service calls. But if you're not aware of WebLogic, you've never really worked on it, this may not even make sense to you. You start looking into other possible strings that you could pivot against. There you see there's another, the Java lang string length, which is another potential data point that you could pivot against. If you drill down further, you would see there's an actual PowerShell .exe that was executed and was downloaded. This is never a good idea, having a PowerShell being executed from on a network traffic, unless you're an admin or something. So again, there's no rhyme or reason why you would choose. This is you would just gain through experience. You would know where to look for this kind of strings. Some of them might just work for you, some of them might not, but this is just an example. So let's see if if we start with this as your place to start with. Your initial analysis would, I don't know what this is doing. Should I run it? Should I not run it? The URL, which is at the very top, which is the post WLS-WSAT, it doesn't even look like an internal URL. It's an external URL going somewhere outside. I'm not sure what to do with the PowerShell command. Obviously, you don't want to run a PowerShell command, but it's in most likely cases running having a PowerShell.exe being executed, that's already a red flag. And you could also look for 5xx responses, and it's not visible here, but you could also look for response pages and to see if the code is actually doing something. Depending upon the kind of response you get, the 5xx actually, from my experience, is actually having a 5x success may or may not be a false positive, but that's something you could look into it. So on a naked eye, this is the data pattern that you're going to look at when you're looking at just payload data. There's just a bunch of stuff that's there. Do you see anything useful? Maybe, from some experience, you might be able to pick some language process builder again, just from the experience that it's there. There's another sequencer which is there. So this is kind of looking at the needle in the haystack. When the Oracle WebLogic exploit initially kickstart, the amount of even if you would have picked one of the other string to run your IDS signature against. The amount of the traffic would have been just a fraction of your total network traffic, and would have been very small. This increases over a period of time, but the delay between the exploit release and the coverage release is it's kind of critical at that point. Obviously, by May 2018, the WebLogic almost had a 50% of events for the process builder, but it just gives you an example of you could pick one of those and run your IDS signature against it and see if it goes. So this kind of drives the point again. You could. There's no way you can look at all the payload data that's available without having an automated system. Even if you're an expert, you would need some level of tooling to go along with it, and then you may want to look into some level of generic exploit behavior that you could pivot your thread hunting IDS signatures against, and then go from there. You also want the systems to focus on processing of the new items rather than a new unknown, which is what really the focus of your threat hunting is. Threat detection is mostly for, as we already discussed, it's about known exploits which is already available outside. You're also going to need a combination of security expertise, data science, and your engineering at scale to really help you to really bring all these things together to help you with the actual threat hunting program. Just want to share an example here, which is kind of it talks about you could basically use your threat hunting or your threat detection systems and see how you could actually complete the circles to form a threat hunting process. You start with your threat detection. You would leverage your pivot against your URIs or your source IPs or one of those destination. Then you start analyzing it. You extract. At this point, the threat is already known. So you really start looking into the actual payload, and you extract the payload and start analyzing the payload, and you actually executing the payload. When you execute the payload, it's most likely going to go and reach out to a command and control site outside. When it does that, you have an opportunity of analyzing your command and control sites again, and the command and control traffic again would have some level of URI and threat data that you could actually use again to generate another threat detection IDS signature based out of it, and you use that threat detection again and because the payload is being it's reaching out to a command and control site and generating a network traffic. It's actually looking at and there's also going to be a URI for your source and destination and the other top, and then you could extract that URI and use that URI to generate another threat detection, and that sort of forms the whole circle. So if you go through the whole threat hunting circle here, this is kind of what's helping you build your automation, and you leverage this automation to basically have your own internal defense automation that you could use to fight your the automation that an attacker is using, based on several threat research reports that's already available outside. The attackers are they're known to use their own automation. They're known to use AWS or some level of scaling that goes beyond that enables them to scale and target their customers and more customers along with it. Now, if you have your automation in place, now your automation is really helping you fight the attacker's automation with your automation. It's if the attacker uses the new vulnerability to drop some level of payload, well, because you have you have an automation that's already in place that's using the threat intel or the signatures that you have already based on. You have an opportunity of somewhat catching it. If the attacker uses a new payload in the same campaign, again you had an opportunity of catching it. So in summary, threat hunting can really give you an advance notice of attacks, of what's going on that you were not really aware of. The capability is directly tied to the amount of data you have and the automation you invest in, and you can be ahead of the attackers, but you can never be ahead of an attacker, but you can always walk close by in their shadow. I mean that's what the threat hunting would eventually make you achieve. I think that's all I have.